wish I was in the land of cotton wool, and there I forgot to look away, look away, look away.
Hello YouTube and welcome to Musicology for the People. I'm your host Allison Kaufman, and today I thought we would talk about some Dixie. Also known as I Wish I Was in Dixie and Dixie's Land, this is one of the most popular songs to survive out of the 19th century United States. It became the song of the South, and it was played after each vote cast for the secession in St. Andrews in Charleston, South Carolina on the 20th of December in 1860. 2 months later, it was played at the inauguration of Jefferson Davis on the 18th of February in 1861. It took on the air of a national anthem for the Confederates, and it became something of a battle cry for the Confederate Army against the Union. But the song was not intended to be a war cry. It was also not intended to be used by the Confederates at all. The song was actually composed by Ohio-born minstrel show composer Daniel Decatur Emmett in 1859. Shortly after Emmett was hired by Bryant's Minstrels, a traveling group, he shut himself in his New York flat and composed the whole song on a Sunday evening. He eventually published the song under the title I Wish I Was in Dixie's Land in 1860. He even got the song copyrighted, but copyright laws were something of a joke at the time. So the song was quickly stolen by other traveling groups and was published illegally in newspapers, broadsides, and even songbooks. Some of these publishers didn't even know the name of the composer, and they would make up names of composers to publish with the sheet music. That's where you get composer names like Jerry Blossom and Dixie Jr. By 1908, 4 years after Emmett's death, 37 people claimed ownership of the piece, and to this day, authorship is still sometimes contested. The song's popularity in the South made the term Dixie synonymous with the South, but according to Robert Leroy Ripley, the song originally had nothing to do with the South. According to Ripley, Dixieland was actually a farm in Long Island, New York, and it was owned by a man named John Dixie. Now, Dixie had befriended many slaves before the Civil War happened, and these slaves viewed Dixieland as something of a paradise. This story would support the idea of a minstrel show song composer writing this song. In the mid-19th century, traveling minstrel show groups would travel around the United States performing slave music. Although many of these songs may have been inspired by spirituals, not very many of them were actually written by African Americans. They were instead part of a trend of blackface performance, or performances where actors, singers, and musicians would put dark makeup on their face and pretend to be African American. These performances would then use exaggerated comedic versions of African American vernacular English. And Dixie as a song was no different. The lyrics tell of a freed slave pining for the plantation he was born on. While the composer may have been a Unionist, the lyrics definitely allude to the idea that slaves belonged in bondage rather than free. This was a common idea, and it was a reaction to the growing abolitionist trend in the United States. The sad fact that this song was actually set as a dance tune makes it even more icky. To portray any freed man as pining for his bonds is today seen as the worst of all ideas, but at the time it was a very popular sentiment. Other songs from the time with this idea are I Ain't Got Time to Tarry and Johnny Roach. But the immediate popularity of Dixie was truly remarkable. Within a year of its first performance, it was being performed all over the United States and had even found its way to Britain, where a group of sailors were performing it. A group of minstrels brought Dixie to New Orleans in 1860, and it became a very big hit, despite the fact that it was written by a Northerner and had an African American star and had none of the patriotism that was very typical of popular songs there at the time. Dixie was performed in April of 1860 as a part of the burlesque show Pocahontas, the Gentle Savage, and the singer, Mrs. John Wood, was asked to, or actually demanded, to sing the song 7 times as encores. By the end of 1860, the South had claimed Dixie as their own, and several new lyrics were written to it to portray Southern pride and support for the war. As I mentioned earlier, it was played each and every time a new vote was cast in favor of the secession, and it was also played at President Davis's inauguration. When Emmett heard how his piece was being used and abused in the South, he said, "If I had known to what use they were going to put my song, I will be damned if I had written it. But the South didn't want anything to do with the Northern composer either. They began attributing the song to Southern composers, and when copyright failed to stick, they began claiming that the song was a folk song with no discernible origin. Poet John Hill Hewitt wrote in 1862 that the homely air of Dixie, of extremely doubtful origin, is generally believed to have sprung from a noble stock of Southern stevedore melodies. New lyrics popped up on an almost weekly basis, and the tempo was quickened to become a quick step in order to keep those soldiers fightin'. At the same time, many Northerners were very displeased with the South's misappropriation of Dixie. Abraham Lincoln himself was very fond of the song, and he even had it played during his campaign in 1860. New versions of the song were published as Dixie for the Union and Dixie Unionized, and they were played by Union bands and sung by Union soldiers up until 1863. The composer himself rearranged the song for a Union military book in 1862. Between 1860 and 1866, 39 different versions of the song were published. When the war ended and General Robert E. Lee surrendered, Abraham Lincoln was quoted as saying, "I propose now closing up by requesting you play a certain piece of music or a tune. I thought Dixie one of the best tunes I ever heard. I had heard that our adversaries over the way had attempted to appropriate it. I insisted yesterday that we had fairly captured it. I presented the question to the Attorney General, and he gave his opinion that it is our lawful prize. I asked the band to give us a good turn upon it." Ooh, that must have felt like a burn. Sorry, I had to. Well, as you can see, the song Dixie has a very confusing and fascinating history. It continues to be performed today, and it is often used by white supremacists and skinheads. I wonder if they know which side of the Civil War actually wrote that song. Well, I hope you learned something new, and if you did, give me a like and share. You can always visit me on the Facebook page and Twitter, where I post funny things throughout the week. Until next week, don't just sit there whistling Dixie.
Musicology.